What's good, my dear language learning masters? And welcome to Natural Languages, and specifically, welcome to a new interview of the Language Input podcast. And today, I'm having Botond from Hungary on the show. And as usual, we're going to talk about language learning, about the power of the natural approach to language acquisition, and much more. So, yeah, I really hope you enjoy this interview. And yeah, finally, and as usual, if if you have any comments, questions, don't hesitate to leave them down below, because we'll be more than happy to look at them and help you out as much as we can. All right. And yeah, with that being said, let's get right into it. Enjoy. All right. So, hi, Boton, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Alvaro.
And
Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again, because yeah, we met in France at the wonderful conference in Agen. Yeah. So yeah, first of all, as usual, just tell us a little bit about yourself, especially when it comes to languages. Your experience as a language teacher, learner, and so on.
Yeah, my language journey, so to say.
Exactly.
Well, let's start at the end of this journey, at the point where I am now.
Cool.
So I have been familiar with Dr. Krashen and everything around comprehensible input for about 12 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I feel that I am at a point where I am confident in whatever I do, whether it is as a learner of languages or someone who helps others acquire languages. And right now, what I enjoy most is teaching my native Hungarian, because whenever I do something with somebody who is trying to learn Hungarian, it is full of discoveries. I always discover things, both about learning and the person I am with and my own language.
Nice.
And it's interesting that when I started to learn how to use comprehensible input approaches as a teacher 10 to 12 years ago, I couldn't imagine doing it with Hungarian. For quite a few years, I didn't dare try it. I only did it in English.
Okay.
But there's been a significant change over the years, over the last 12 years, because in those days, even 8 years ago, there were absolutely no videos on the internet.
Correct.
Actually, the only example that I found back then was A.J. Hogue. You probably know him.
Yeah.
I'm grateful to him, actually, because it was him who opened up the whole world of comprehensible input to me. It's interesting that it all started with search. And I remember the key words I had. It was English, listening or audio, stories, and laughing.
Good combination.
And what I found was comprehensible input
Mm,
in the
right,
end.
right.
But that was something that I'd always been after ever since I had an encounter with various languages.
Correct. Because you taught you taught Hungarian or English before that with traditional approaches, or
Actually, I always started to somehow avoid the traditional approach
okay,
because I knew that it was useless.
cool.
So I always tried to do something different. And I remember that many years ago, long before I first heard about comprehensible input, Gresham, or even A.J. Hogue, uh, I, I was reading a lot of literature about language learning and language teaching and the different approaches. It's interesting that Gresham's name didn't come up. I can't remember reading of him, but I encountered a method that was just presented as a game.
Interesting.
Fleshing out an imaginary character and talking about everything that this character can be, wherever they are, and things like that. So it could have been the beginning of TPRS.
Yeah.
I loved it. But somehow I put it aside.
Okay.
But now thinking back, I realized that I could have gone, could have struck that direction, but I didn't.
Okay.
It was only when the world of comprehensible input was opened up to me that I felt that now I am on home ground. This is my world. This is my place to be.
Right.
And this is the place for anyone who wants to get a language.
Yep. Yeah, it's
Wow.
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So the way I now think about these opposing approaches, the natural and the artificial, is like, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a creator of artificial plants, artificial flowers? Do you want to assemble those artificial things, taking the pieces and putting them together? Or do you want to be a gardener and let life sprout and blossom?
Interesting analogy, like it. Yeah.
Just think about optimal input. The concept that Dr. Gresham himself has arrived at recently. So what are the 4 characteristics of optimal input? It is comprehensible. It is compellingly interesting. It is rich in linguistic material, and it's available in abundance. Now, this is exactly like healthy nourishment for an infant. When you start acquiring a language, you are an infant in the language.
Correct.
Now, what healthy nourishment is for the body, that is comprehensible input for the brain that will map out the language.
Yep.
The food needs not to be chewy. It needs to be easily digestible. That is comprehensible.
Correct.
It must be interesting, compelling. The food must be tasty, delicious.
Nice.
If it is, then it will naturally contain all the vitamins, minerals, protein, whatever, just like comprehensible input, rich in linguistic stuff. And you need the food to be available whenever you are hungry. It's not enough for an infant to be fed once a week or twice a month.
Correct.
Abundance is key as well.
Yeah, they're listening to the language the whole time. Yeah. Yes, I really like your analogy about food and so on, because again, it's a natural process, right? And we keep, or I keep reminding people that when we're talking about comprehensible input, we're not talking about some made up thing, right? It's just the same way I acquire Spanish, you acquire Hungarian, and we all acquire our native languages, right? So it's a process that, it's a natural process again, and a process that worked for every single one of us, right? Because that's just the way it works in our brain, right? And that's the beauty of the internet today, that we have access to content, ideas from different people from different countries, and we can learn languages online through interesting and compelling, like you said, resources.
Yes,
Based on
indeed.
storytelling and games, and yeah, it's really powerful. So I guess in a way, from your experience, because I'm talking about the internet, because I can see that from the beginning you just weren't convinced by the traditional grammar approach, right? So there was something there that you didn't like from the beginning. But the difference probably was that now you have access to so many different things and ideas and different types of content, right? As opposed to back then, when, you know, it took you a while to get access to those resources, right?
Yeah, and often you had to put up with quite boring stuff. That was comprehensible.
Right. There was how to find comprehensible and compelling content, right?
Yeah.
It was, yeah, like one or the other most of the time. Yeah. Cool. And all right, so that's your experience as a language teacher mostly, and as a language learner. Like, was it always the same way, or because of sort of understanding that wasn't the way, when you wanted to learn another language, did you also have that feeling that this is not the way to learn a language? Like, I'm talking about the traditional grammar approach, of course.
Yeah, actually, as a learner, I always managed to avoid the traditional approach.
Well done.
like when I wanted to get a language, because, for example, I wanted to read books in the original, and so I had to pick up a text first, a textbook.
Yep.
Now, what I did, I read the first lesson, because all the textbooks had stories, dialogues, stuff like that.
Right.
So I read it. Then I skimmed the explanations, and then came pages and pages of exercises. I always kept that. I didn't want to exercise. I just wanted to reach the next story.
Nice.
So from story to story to story, I got to the end of the book in no time. And I was always interested in what it means and how it sounds and how it looks. I wanted to understand it as it was.
Right.
I didn't want to dissect the language. I was not that interested in that dissecting grammar stuff.
Yeah.
I was kind of lazy, and I think laziness is an advantage when it comes to picking up a language. If you are too busy dissecting it and waste lots of time doing that, you don't have time. You don't have as much time to just get comprehensible input.
Correct.
The real nourishment.
Yeah, and you'll end up giving up because you can work as hard as you can, but sooner or later, your motivation is just gonna fade away because it's just a hard, boring process, right?
Now you spoke about the internet, how useful and wonderful it is that it is so easy today to get the stuff that is both comprehensible and interesting for you. However, I don't like to teach online that much.
Okay.
Because I need that real face-to-face interaction without the glitches, the technical glitches, and to be in the same real physical space with my students. And the gestures, TPR, the TPR component of the whole stuff is, I think, super important. And this is another thing that I consider crucial. I think that the language, whether it is written or spoken, is just the skin of the meaning that you want to convey.
Right.
It's like the tip of the iceberg. And what is below the surface? What is below the surface? Now, I think what's below the surface is kinetic. Language is full of directional bits. Like what works in space works in time as well. Like it is long. When you say that, it can be long in space, it can be long in time. But it is something that you feel in your body. And I love what James Asher, Dr. James Asher came up with. And when I am helping other people get my native Hungarian, I have realized that it is much easier to explain what is what and why it is and how we do it, just showing it in space bodily.
Right.
So TPR is communicating with your whole body, and it's always part of the language. And if you exaggerate it, you work on it, it will be tremendous help.
Right. Yeah,
I love this aspect. I love this aspect of the comprehensible input.
I understand what you mean. Like, I mean, of course, like if you're physically with your students, there's a whole lot of like gestures, body movement, live feedback that you're getting. I mean, it's always easier, of course, but the good news is it doesn't have to be either or to me, right? It can be and. So it can be both.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course. Exactly.
and on a practical way, if you want to learn Japanese, you might not be able to find a Japanese teacher in your hometown, right? So it's nice to find. It's nice to have people on the internet who are creating content for it, right? So that's the beauty of it. And there's some activities that can sort of replicate that. And what I mean by that is you were talking about like the physical acquisition of the language, right? That it really helps you when the teacher's actually moving around and showing you with gestures what he means or she means, right? It's or you yourself as a student are moving around and following instructions, like back to TPR, yeah, like total physical response. It's sort of a physical acquisition of the language that's really going to help you acquire the language and remember all things, right? But I found there's some ideas that you can use online to sort of replicate that, even if you're not the one moving as a language learner. Now I'm talking about, because for example, I've talked many times about in my own journey, the way I learned English, or most of my English, was by watching the NBA, like American basketball. Because first of all, that's super interesting to me. So that back to your compelling aspect of it, right? But then with sports, there's like a physical acquisition of the language as well, you know, and because I was watching an NBA game, and while the commentator was explaining, I was actually watching the action develop simultaneously on the court, right? So it was way easier to sort of connect the ideas. You know what I mean? Yeah. So even though it wasn't me who was moving around or the teacher, I was actually watching the games, and like I said, well, the commentator was explaining the things that were going on the course simultaneously. So it was way easier to connect the ideas and to understand what everything meant because of the physical movement of it. Or I've been talking about it in previous episodes as well. When it comes to different resources that I'm using to acquire other languages, things like cooking recipes, or you know, videos about how to draw, you know, just things like that, in which they teach quote unquote teacher, because I mean, many times they don't actually aim to teach you the language, right? But they're teaching you how to draw, and they're explaining what they're doing and doing it at the same time, which is, again, I think it follows the same principles as the things you were talking about.
Exactly.
But you're not necessarily the person moving around, or you know.
Yeah, I have an analogy for this. I always stress, and I think that it is with you and with our colleagues working with comprehensible input, I always stress to my students that they should not force themselves to speak. In when you are getting a language, picking up a language, speech will come in its own sweet time.
Correct.
But whenever you are getting that comprehensible input, whenever you are hearing the language, you are listening to somebody, actually you are always communicating with them. When I teach Hungarian, I tell my students to speak as little as possible, to use as few words as they can get away with. just to interact. And I say that when they can use a gesture without a word, that might be the best response to a question.
Right.
So what you were talking about NBA and watching a football game, not being the player yourself, but that game is also taking place inside you. All those kinetic things are taking place inside you, even if you are just in your seat.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy is that when you are getting comprehensible input, whatever apparatus we have to produce speech, starting from the brain and the nerves and the muscles and everything, the whole apparatus is in exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Without producing output. And this is the same or very similar to the experience that a viewer of a game gets in a stadium.
Correct. Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
I even read in a book that it was about the myelin, how practice reinforces or creates the connections between the
Neurons or
neurons, yeah. That one of the example the author wrote up was someone who learned how to play tennis by watching the players. Yeah, maybe it was Tiger Woods.
Okay. Oh, but so then it's golf or?
Isn't he a tennis player?
I mean, it could be, I don't know, Roger Federer.
Okay.
Or
doesn't matter whether golf or tennis. It's
no
the
worries,
same.
no worries.
Okay.
All right.
So it's
yeah, go ahead.
And what it boils down to is that the processes that go on unconsciously, the processes that you don't want to control, are the most important processes for real things to grow.
Right.
It just it's like the gardener's work, who doesn't dig up the soil to see how the roots are developing.
Correct. Yeah, that's just happening.
Just make sure that there is enough humidity.
Mm-hmm.
You just water the plants.
Yeah, make sure that they've got the right conditions in order to grow, right?
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about the fact that many people talk about the language learning process being more difficult when you're an adult and so on. And I think it's not, in the end, it's not about losing your ability to learn a language after a certain age. It's actually that after a certain age, you have the ability to consciously control the process, which messes up with the whole thing.
Yes,
right?
That's it.
So I want to keep reminding everybody. So this is not about the process being harder after the age of 5 or 6 or whatever it is, the subjective call, right? It is the fact that we adults want to consciously control the process that messes up with the whole thing.
Exactly.
So like sorry, like that's like
the point where you lose,
yeah.
the point where you lose is the point where you want to control it.
Exactly. Yep. The whole conscious versus subconscious thing. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I keep telling everyone, like we all have the ability to learn another language. It's just we as humans, we have that in our brains, and whether you're 5, 20, 55, 80, it's just about the way we do it. And yep, absolutely.
Yeah, this control thing is very interesting.
It is.
And it's true in various things. Just look at the world now. It's all about control. And
right.
where are we now?
Yep. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting because it's funny that the more you try to control the process, consciously control the process, the less it's helping you, the more frustrated you're feeling, and yeah, it's just not working because that's not the way it works. Yeah, by the way, that's actually excellent news because it means we don't need to go through painful grammar exercises and memorization in order to learn a language. So that I keep telling people that's excellent news. the fact that the process works that way is excellent news.
Oh. Yeah, by the way, this is one thing that I keep returning to when I help someone learn a language. Mm-hmm. I always need to warn them not to try working, to warn them not to fall to the other side where you want to control it. Just enjoy it. And they do.
Right. Yep. They do.
Hungarian is reputed to be one of the hardest languages. But my students say Hungarian is fun.
Yeah.
And that's all it is.
Correct. Yeah, and again, you when you were born, you were not born with a specific neuron to understand Hungarian. You just were naturally exposed to it, right? So again, it might be more difficult from a grammar standpoint, but again, the good news is that has nothing to do with the actual acquisition process. So yeah, like I talked about this as well. Like I don't think there's an easier or more complicated language. Of course, depending on your own native language, there are certain related languages that are gonna be easier to learn for you, not because they're easier in themselves, but because you're gonna have access to more comprehensible input way sooner than with a totally different language, right?
Exactly. So what approaches do we use, or what techniques do we use when we help others acquire a language? You mentioned recipes and stuff that you were talking about languages that you learn using such stuff.
Right.
What do you do with your students? Good. I sometimes use TPRS. We make up a story out of nothing. And I like to do it completely free. Starting out of nothing and just let it go, and amazing things happen.
I like that.
The other day I have a student from the Philippines learning Hungarian.
Nice.
A nice young lady, she's the chosen one of an old student of mine, and he brought her to me now. And we made up an amazing story together when we started to do TPRS. Before that, I used story listening with her. Do you also use that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to think of different ways of providing comprehensible input in a fun way, because again, it's about what you talk about and not how you talk about it, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I use TPRS like storytelling or story creation a lot, but recently I'm trying to think of different ideas as well, like board games, for example. I play board games with my students a lot because, first of all, they're fun, and that's always a plus. And then the good things about board games is, back to the previous point, they're very visual, right? So there's also a physical acquisition of the language involved. So I'm moving this meeple around because I wanna, I have this strategy in mind, so I want to do this or that. And then I'm rolling the dice, and you actually see the person roll the dice, right? And then the good things about board games is that you play on a turn-based. They're turn-based games, right? So you actually have the time to explain things as a teacher, right? So I think I'm gonna do this because my plan is to move to this place so this other player can get there. These.
Wow. Do you do war games in various languages?
I do it in Spanish because that's the language I'm teaching. Because, like you said about Hungarian, I feel I love teaching Spanish the most. Like I've been teaching English as well, but recently I'm focusing on just Spanish because that's my native language. I can always find a way around. That's where I feel the most comfortable and the one I like the most. And besides that, as a language learner myself, I prefer to learn from a native language if possible. So that's why I'm doing it. But yeah, it works with any language, right? And yeah, like first of all,
So you do war games in Spanish?
yeah.
Wow, that's great.
Again, it's just any game, storytelling, just real life situations in which the topic or the story or the game is the interesting part and not the language itself, right? Yeah, so that's the thing. But in general, so I'm using board games, right? Because they're fun. But also, even when I'm doing storytelling, I try to incorporate gaming type experiences. Like, for example, we're creating a story and we have to come up with a detail or, who the main character is or who his or her friend is. So instead of just using the first answer or the first idea, we come up with 4 options and then we roll a dice to decide which one we're going to use to keep on going with the story. So, some like it's still storytelling, but we're, like incorporating game type or game-like experiences to make it more fun. Or I've also used, I think they're called, in English, they're called like pick your own experience books. So we're creating, it's storytelling, story creation again. So we're creating a book in which, say, the main character gets to a place in which he or she needs to decide between 3 options. I'm just making it up now. So you can go north, you can go south, you can go east or west, right? And we're creating the book. There are actually websites and platforms for that. And afterwards, you can actually read the book with them. And when you get to that point in the story, you actually have 4 different links. So if you decide to go north, there's one story. If you decide to go west, the story is different. So just storytelling games, things like natural things that you would enjoy on a daily basis in your own native language, right?
I love to try it once.
Yeah, it's fun for me as a teacher, you know.
Do you have any videos with war games that you
Yeah,
do with your
I do.
students of Spanish?
I do. Yeah,
I'll check them out.
Perfect. And yeah, I was gonna ask. So you talk about your experience as a language learner as well. So are you learning any languages now? Or
yeah, quite a few,
no?
actually. So I'm working on my German, then Russian, after that Spanish,
Nice.
French, Italian, and Polish is also waiting
Nice.
in the hallway.
Okay. Yeah, because that's another thing that I keep telling people, that if you do it the natural way, you can learn 2, 3, 4 languages at the same time. Like
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I am a little bit addicted to videos on the internet, and so I might encounter something interesting in this language or another or that, and whether it is Italian, I am low level, but it's interesting.
Yeah,
it's worthwhile to watch.
Exactly. Yeah, it just depending on your level, just try to find something that you're interested in, first of all, and it's comprehensible. And thankfully, there's more and more teachers creating content as well to help beginners get access to comprehensible input in a fun way, right? Because that's probably the most complicated point, is when you're starting out with a language, that even the most simple resources like cartoons, for example, are not comprehensible, right? So that's when you probably need someone to create content that you can understand as a complete beginner, right? Which is probably the hardest part.
Yeah. By the way, I was mentioning Italian. 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I was teaching a small group of foreign volunteers in Hungary who worked in children's and families' home.
Okay.
Doing very nice work, social work. They it was a group of 4, and they came from 4 different countries. One of them was an Italian girl, and they were learning Hungarian, so as to be able to communicate with the people that they worked with. This Italian girl wasn't really interested in learning Hungarian. That's how we started out. And I just told them Hungarian folk tales in easily comprehensible language, one after another. And in the end, she enjoyed it so much that when I asked her to tell a story for us in Italian, so we turned it over, and it was amazing to hear her.
That's wonderful.
And then the girl who came from Turkey, she told us a story in Turkish.
How awesome is that? Yeah. Yeah, it's just real life communication, right? And I mean, the only sort of skill, I mean, quote unquote skill that you have to learn as a teacher is to adapt the way you communicate for the message to be comprehensible, right? Whether,
and this is something, and this is something that is natural to people. Again,
right. Yeah.
The people who are around an infant who has just arrived into the world, recently arrived, they can do it instinctively, intuitively, right, to communicate with the infant in a way that he or she understands what they mean.
Correct. Yeah, and even as an adult, when you just want to communicate, you always find a way. When conscious learning doesn't get in the way, you're just communicating for the pure sake of communicating. You find a way, right? And when a foreigner comes to your country and he or she needs help with whatever, you find a way to tell them, right? So it's all about adjusting your speech all the time for your students to understand what you're talking about. And back to your point, even if they're not interested, because you're having so much fun, your storytelling, which is pretty much what we do on a daily basis in our lives, right? It's just gonna become interesting, and it doesn't. Yeah, that's what I always talk about. It doesn't feel like you're learning a language, right? And ironically, you actually are, right? So it's when it doesn't feel like you're learning the language, when you're actually acquiring it, which is ironic, but
yeah,
it's the way it works. Yeah. Perfect.
I suggest we do another part.
Yeah.
Because I have to go now.
Oh, sure. No worries. No worries. I can see you have so many ideas and analogies in mind. I really like that. Yeah, like that. The whole thing about naturally approaching teaching and learning, right? Because that's a process that worked for every single one of us when we were kids, and continues to work for every single human being in the planet, right? Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much, Botond. It was wonderful. And yeah, definitely we'll
you, Alvaro.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we'll be in touch. We'll probably do part 2 with new ideas. And yeah, I pretty much agree with you in the whole natural thing idea of just, like I said, that when it doesn't feel like you're learning the language, that's probably the best moment. Like that's when it's working the most, right?
Yeah, I always tell my students, just enjoy the language.
Right.
And I also try to get them feel it in their whole body.
Correct. Yeah. It's just, there's such a difference between doing it this way as opposed to artificially and consciously trying to control the process. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so yeah, again, thank you so much, Botond. And yeah,
Thank you, Alvaro, for having me here.
No problem. We'll see each other in part 2 sometime. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Keep in touch.